A clever dog. If you can find anyone who's got anything good to say about Jack Adams, tell him to give me a call. Glenn Hall on the telephone. 1. After the game, the last of the press gone, went over to his way of seeing again. Jack, oh Jack, they said, you are a clever dog. Yet another brilliant thought emerged. The time was right. Bring Sawchuk down to Windsor for a week. That should do the trick. Let him look across the river at the lights. You'd hardly say he set the town on fire. He only got into half a dozen games, and what with all that skyline seemed to offer, not to mention the French-Canadian girls who hung around the rink, brazen, the way they looked right back at your look, his play was little more than mediocre. So what's the fuss? Said one of the Spitfires, lifting a puffy brow, though some had learned to know the glow that marks the chosen few. And Jack was Jack, and well aware of what Terry could do. So why give a horse's fart what happened on the southern side? And south of the river, that's where Terry was in that moment, looking across the lights, though he'd have said Windsor was north of Detroit. Tricky geography here, easy to get turned around. But the skyline blotted out was Canada. Tomorrow he'd take the train across to Detroit. Labored cough, lurch, and clank. Trains were the noise of the world to him. Up on the trestle, something rat-shaped rippled over the ties, inking out lights as it went, while Jack across the river signed a check and closed his door. 2. Late as it was, something drew him all the way to the top. He stopped abruptly where the vastness opened out, where a sudden gaping took his breath away, and far below, and ghostly in the maintenance lights, the fabled Olympia ice. His ice. Nothing to equal it anywhere in the world. Why was he wanting space tonight? Something looming, he supposed. He looked across at the clock with its export sign and its smiling Highland girl. He liked the view from up here, although he found something unsettling about that woman, larger than life, and all those empty seats. He never liked the sight of empty seats. He glanced at the ice again, miles away it seemed, with its whispery sheen, its mirrored nets, a nagging absence in each crease. One thing he knew, without a shade of doubt, wherever the weary goalies were in that moment, whatever comfort the night had brought their aching limbs, their minds were here, making the crucial plays all over again. This is what Jack knew better than anyone else. Whatever happened of importance in the building happened in between those blood-red posts. He thought of Durnan's courage tonight, his wild abandon diving into the pile. Something lifted inside him. That was the word. He thought of the best he'd battled himself, Vezina maybe, or Benedict with his leather mask, or Gardner, the fierce little Scot, the first to charge out of his crease to challenge the shooters. A great going out was what he felt himself, and love. Again, that was the word. But this was followed by a dizziness, and on its heels a fright. He reached out a hand for the rail. He'd had enough of open space, of standing eye to eye with the clock, never mind that cool, assessing gaze. Whatever she had on her mind, or under that kilt, was of limited interest to him. He wondered about it sometimes. Why couldn't his players leave the women alone? Fractious encounters were more to his taste. He'd been a savage himself in front of the net. Now what he needed, he knew, was something to clamp in his teeth, a good cigar, the clutter and funk of his office, and someone to straighten out. He did have that meeting with Sawchuk coming up. 3,000. What the devil was he thinking? He'd tear up the check and make out another for 2. He sensed his team was on the verge of doing some damage, and Terry had all the skills to change the game. But if he couldn't take the heat, or got himself hurt, he'd be out of here as fast as last year's hat. Who did Jack already have but Harry Lumley? No slouch in anyone's eyes. And then that other kid they'd signed on a whim, what's his name, Hall. He'd have to dump the pond hockey stance, but he was quick and called you sir. Another pussycat, you'd have to think. He settled himself in his chair to wait for Terry's knock at the door. I am a clever dog, he thought, and in the pink. Ascension. "Oh, he could be a son of a bitch," says Ted, who ought to know. Ted Lindsay, the captain, leader at the infamous Battle of the Sioux. First man into any fray, forget it's an exhibition game. For 6 full minutes slugs it out with red-eye hay. They catch their breath and start again in the penalty box, finally going at it in the stands with cops. Or fiercely, toe-to-toe with Ezenicki of the Leafs, Lindsay, 5'8" and giving 20 pounds away, nonetheless knocks him cold. They shift him onto the metal table where slowly Wild Bill wakes and, in a silver, drifting moment, contemplates his worldly line of work. 11 stitches from his hairline to his brow, 4 in his mouth where Lindsay broke a tooth, 4 more up the side of his head. Well, terrible Ted needs 1. A single stitch in a hand so swollen he can't make a fist for a week. "Yes, toss a cup of rice at Terry and he'd catch it all," says Ted, but he could be one son of a bitch and kept the other guys on edge. Even in photographs over the years when they won, the guys hastily gathered, grinning and half undressed, dripping champagne, you see his gradual ascension, his drifting up toward the top, far from where you want your goalie, front and center, rumpled and content. In 1961, after they take out Toronto, everyone around him seems to turn away. You see his hands rest heavily on Howe's and Ullman's shoulder pads, but Gordy oos the other way with Sid, and Normie leans toward the lens. The two beside him turn away, re-rumpling happy teammates' hair. Bemused, the guy behind leans further back as if to cock an ear at noises in the vent above his head. Left to himself, Terry's dreamy, miles away, his mind perhaps on how to scale that wall as captured heroes do and pry the grating off and get away. Bay Roberts, Part 2, Eastwind. "Good night," said a voice in the trees, as if the game were done and we could all go home. When they pulled aside the boughs to let us in, the waiting crowd stood up and cheered. You felt a little foolish wearing shoes. The ice was getting soft, sishy, they said, but it ought to hold up for an hour or so. You heard the sound of moving water everywhere. Someone beside me said, "What would any of these guys know about ice?" We glanced away, embarrassed by their gear, the mismatched socks and dreadful skates. Then the sleet came sideways out of the night, and I'd forgotten how I hated lacing skates in the cold. You heard the moaning and bitching on our bench when Flamin, our captain, sniffs at the air and looks at us. "Boys," he says, "I like the feel of things. The happy crowd, the smell of spruce and wood smoke in the air, and half of their team inviting us over for drinks." McKell gets everyone up on their feet from the start, going end to end with the puck, then circling back and taking it in all over again. You hear the rising buzz of disbelief. It's a bit of a dream for them as well. Until tonight, they've only known us on the radio. Their players go after the puck, but all together, and turn to find it up the ice tucked neatly into their net. They glance at one another, thinking, what's their part in all of this? Slowly they skate to center ice, and you see the little grins begin, as if they're seeing the situation now, another close place and impossible odds. Down in the dark alone, my mind drifts back to Michigan. I see the newly flooded Olympia ice and hear the crowd as Hall brings out the team. Well, here, my sweater's white with sleet, and there's an uproar in the dark as Boyven sits on both referees. Then Flamin brings that lady's umbrella out of the stands. "Gotta look after your goalie," he says, looking to see how I'm taking it all tonight. They must have had 60 guys out for the game, 4 different teams crowding onto their bench until it turns into a free-for-all at the end. They all tumble onto the ice, and the Bruins go sit on the boards or up in the crowd. Their man in front with the puck pulls up just out of reach, and it's hard to say which is the worst of a goaltender's dreams, the laughter welling out of the stands, or 59 sons of bitches looking for a loose puck. "What are you doing? Shoot the goddamn thing," I shout. "Not so fast, my buddy, my darling," he grins and drops his gloves, bearing a pair of split and battered fists, one with a program in it, the other a pen. Can we boys have your autograph? Desperate moves. The greatest save I ever saw in hockey, says Plant, waving pages of notes in his trapper hand. The black suit too tight and the tie too narrow, emphasizing an angular face and a startling and elegant sprawl as he tries in his chair to show Ward Cornell just how Sawchuk, flat on his back and a pile-up in front, puts a pad high in the air to save the game. As Terry himself turns up. He's come straight from the ice in his gear for a rare interview, easing himself in his leaden pads towards an awkward chair. Cables, tables, precarious lights, disaster a stumble away. He knows about that. He's careful, too, with Plant's enthusiasm, shrugs off the compliments. The guys were clearing rebounds, the forwards picking up their man. Asked about the save, he looks away. I stuck up a leg, as if to say, like anyone would. He puts one on the ice. It's in. You know yourself, Jacques, it's better to be lucky than good. Plant resists a cozy acquiescence like a monk. He seems too open, too unguarded for a goalie. The heart of matters is what he wants to wade into, but this is hockey night in English Canada. His catching hand comes up to make a point, to ask about the sudden drop in weight, over 200 pounds to 165 in a year, the trade, the brutal Boston press, the train in the night to Detroit. But Terry steers the questions off into a corner. You do what you have to do. You know I've always admired you, Jacques, down at the other end. Plant sits back, unsatisfied, and Ward murmurs something inert about grit or momentum. You see the goaltenders glance at one another, the only moment in the interview that their eyes meet. The silent exchange is arresting. They know each other's subtlest movements in their sleep, but they're not accustomed to being so close. You wonder what they might have said to one another left alone, but up this close it's better to keep side on. That's the message from Terry, at least. So when you saw Keon wide open, says Plant, what you made was a desperate move. That's it, Jacques, Sawchuk says, all in one motion, detaching his mic and rising up out of the ill-considered chair. That's all it was. Night crossing and ice. We locked up the cars in North Sydney and looked at the sea, grey and uninviting. Nothing like inland ponds or lakes that we knew. You could sink forever, someone murmurs. Close cloud, the color says, bad mistake. Something on the beach attracting gulls, wreckage and rock, the start or end of things, who could say? We went aboard the William Carson in the dark, the winds kissed like a lost wife, gulls on the waterfront sheds, looked away as we sailed. 9 or 10 hours the crossing if the weather holds, but we barely get into the bar when the fun begins. Pitch and roll and bang, Jesus Christ, the bow riding up, hammering down it. We grab at anything lifted and dangled, our bodies hopeless, recognizing nothing of this motion. Porpoising, boys, that's what we calls it here. Guaranteed she'll be a memorable night. Who could call this heaving darkness home? Who'd go out of his house in this for a game of hockey? All night long a locker door slammed shut like someone raging, looking for the one way out. Up and hold on the crest and down with a bang and bang that bloody door. Then deep in the night a grinding inches from my ear, as if we were into a depth of animals. Nothing but ice, my love, I hear a passing voice in the corridor. Pans and a bit of slob, we seize all we wants of that in the spring. No country for old men. I'd like to leave hockey like that, in good style. Someone read his lips and wrote it down. Bedlam drowned the words themselves, an uproar after the miracle, jubilation, the clatter of sticks flung down. On the dressing-room floor like crutches in a pile. Hair-stuck tape and plaster peeled away. Down to the raw, gap-tooth wrapped in towels, the shouts and candor of the showers, though each of the Leafs had stopped to speak a word or two to Terry, each taking in the open flap of undershirt, the old man's bones like a washboard, Where the devil does he find it? The seeming fleshless legs without their pads. 2. Half undressed, he slumps against the wall. No one says a word about the cigarette in his hand. He'd drink a 7-Up, but can't get up and wouldn't ask. A fog billows out of the showers. Bare feet flap the marshy floor. Cautiously, the press guys squeeze between the massive flanks and watch their backs. A snapping towel could tear your ear, or worse, take the arse right out of your suit. A little getting even, masked as a joke. A leaf or two has slipped away, and the older guys are quieter now, more thoughtful, knotting ties. One by one, they sense a deepening silence in the room and turn to look where Terry's resting, panting, having wrestled off his sodden shirt. Their eyes tell them, armload of plums, say, peacock's plumage. Their fingers pause in their intricate task. Jesus, Yuki, someone breaks the silence. The whole room gapes the hammered chest and belly. Easy to count the darker 9 or 10 from Hull. They can't even look at the shoulder, but watch as he peels off the infamous underwear and heads without a word toward the showers. These were guys who'd paid their dues, who'd seen it all, but this was a moment that got their attention, seeing what they'd asked of him that night. 3. Funny how a mirror only messed you up, or even trying to think it through. Just let your fingers tie the tie. Good way to play the game itself, they would have said in those days. Gingerly they bent to reach their shoes, feeling bumps and bruises of their own. Maybe what the paper said was so. Maybe it wasn't a game for old men. But Jesus, that just made the winning sweeter. 1 to go against the Hawks, then the last great battle of a golden age, they'd read. Few here had a philosophic bent, but these were thoughtful times, the country taking its pulse and all, a World's Fair and a waking nation's riots where they'd meet an ancient enemy in Montreal. The players timed it so they left the dressing room alone. Their day might be nearly done, but they knew things wouldn't be so bitter if they walked away a winner. Each risked a glance behind, then closed the door. Sometimes you really didn't like the guy. He pissed you off. He wouldn't talk. In warm-up, stepped away from shots he didn't want. But this was war, and all of that meant squat. You gave your goalie room. They'd got their look at what he paid for what he did. Besides, they knew they weren't going anywhere without him. Nothing but moonlight here. Terry looks out at me, pointing just inside the post as I was next. That roused the boys for a joke or two about goalies together. I lumbered in like some old woods horse deep in snow or a man balled up with the weight of the world. I knew what the trouble was. Divided loyalties. I tried to blank out who's in goal with a chance to close the gap. Did I mention they put 4 past me real quick, undressed me in front of everyone I know? After the game and half a dozen drinks, we went out onto my ice, 2 goalies going fishing in the dark. So where's the lake? He looks around, coming out of the woods. Nothing but moonlight here, nothing but snow. You're standing on it, I said. I showed him how you feel with your line for the bottom. He sat, not saying much and catching less, but a hole in the ice at night is a dangerous thing, and he told me a thing or two about the life I wouldn't mention here. I was after rubbing places where I'd taken shots, surprising myself with some I'd stopped, and crazy things had started creeping into my head. Over a snow-covered lake, a moon can be mischievous. But slowly a chill crept into my bones, and more than once I thought about my wife and how she'd come hammering back to bed in the cold and crush against my heat, and how she'd warm her hands between my legs the way she liked to fall asleep. And my rabbit snares in the woods, I thought about those, and Mad Dog Lake, and up in the wind after birds with a friend, or coming on caribou tracks in an early snow. Yeah, it was 4 they tucked in behind me, before the shine was even off the ice. And then I missed that open side he left for me, bounced it off the post with everybody looking on. Foolish to be so fine in goalie gear. Out on the lake that night, I got free of a lot of foolishness I wouldn't mention here. Ineptness and geography. I doubt there's many find salvation where they hope. One of you. Catchers in baseball, closest to cousins in your differentness. The safeguarding home, the healing bones, the serious gear which ought to indicate the possibilities, and only one of you. Denied the leap and dash up the ice, what goalies know is side to side, an inwardness of monk and cell. They scrape, they sweep, their eyes are elsewhere as they contemplate their narrow place. Like saints, they pray for nothing, which brings grace. Off days, what they want is space. They sit apart in bars, they know the length of streets in 20 cities, but it's their saving sense of irony that further isolates them as it saves. Percy H. Lesueur, for one, in a fitful sleep, flinching at rising shots in a bad light, rubbers flung out of the crowd, insults in 2 languages, finally got out of bed in a moment of bleak insight, went down and burnt a motto onto his stick, Hec est manus quae ictum deflecit. This is the hand that turns away the blow. Or Laurent Chabot in 1928, when someone asked him why he always took the trouble to shave before a game, angled out a leg to check a strap and answered in a quiet voice, I stitch better when my skin is smooth. Or dapper Charlie Rayner, who stopped a bullet with his chin, another couple of teeth and some hasty work to close an ugly cut. Back the next night he takes another, full in the face. A second night in a row he's down, spitting bits of tooth to the ice. It's a wonder, he mutters, why somebody doesn't get hurt in this game. The season of wayward thinking. The first killing frost last night. The cat leaves tracks across the lawn, and squash vines droop like vague summer plans. I take a long walk thinking of Terry after all the years, the leaves letting go all around me in the sun. Some plunge to the ground like fanatical pilots, some loop and tumble, some slide back and forth, prolonging the moment of settling. Styles of departure. I'm up to my ankles in golden leaves, half conscious of looks from passing cars. Someone on the bus asked Bill White once what was on his mind. The Hawks had come to Halifax to play an exhibition game. The bus sat idling at a light on South Park Street, and Bill was quiet, looking out at the trees in the public gardens. White was your classic stay-at-home defenseman, your solid team guy, architect of victory. Burning leaves, he said, looking out at the workers who leaned on their rakes by the fires. The smell of burning leaves, it always makes me think of home. Long speech for Bill. In the moment of silence that followed, you heard the well-tuned engine, then the clap of laughter like a shot across the bow. You hear what Big Bill said? Even the driver from Dartmouth had to smile, though he could hear how everyone was fond of Bill. Simple world. The lumber for the other guys, the hoarse laugh for your own. The laughter echoed loudly on the bus. The young guys up for a look were a little careful, anxious to make a proper impression. Up in the jump seat, Billy Ray took in the autumn scene. He looked at the golden trees and the last of the flowers. He looked at the sloping dreamers by the fires, and made a note to keep an eye on Bill for a game or two. The young wolves let their eyes slide past his place of privilege, their ears pricked up at something in the way he spoke. What I liked about bars was the neon invitation, the glow down the block on a bad night. A tramp's hieroglyphic on a likely gate was the taxi burbling off, was the way you stamped off snow in the doorway, careful not to give the wrong impression, was what the place gave out of someone's dream, the photographs, the antlers gathering dust, a ship's barometer you tapped for luck, was the clatter of caps and slam of cooler doors, was the little notes the girls stuck up for each other by the phone, and the way they had with regulars, the teasing, interrupted talk, was knowing they'd always be back to their ashtray under the bar, was knowing the route exactly to the can, was the mirrors doubled bottles, those that ended up in the back, Aquavit and Metaxa, Galliano, long-necked and lethal, the bartender's best friend. What I liked about bars was the way they shoehorned you into the night. Someone you've seen before sends over a drink. Tough night, Terry. Somewhere, not far, a woman's low, distracted laugh. You hear her murmur something excusing herself. You wait to hear her voice behind you, or see her purse as it sags on the bar by your arm. What I liked was no one pressed you to look at a tap or take a troubled daughter back to bed. You couldn't just go home, your head still rattling over the one you made at the end or didn't, or something some bastard said from their bench. Bloody Pilat, the way he gets under your skin. How could you think about riddles and hens and trains that could, when you knew you couldn't? Some nights it hurts just to breathe. Then you had your assholes in the grays. So here I am again, looking down into an unfamiliar street. Some things don't change, this radiator's welcome heat, or how the snow begins, that sparse and aimless swirling past the lights. And there's the purse again, collapsed on the floor like a daughter's indispensable animal tumbled off the bed. Are you leaving so soon? I hear her murmur into her pillows. A draft from an ill-fitting window stirs immobile over her bed. Has it started snowing yet, she asks. But she won't wake up enough to hear, even if I answer.